Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the James City County Planning Commission. It is February 1st, 2023 at 6 p.m. Mr. Holt, will you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rogers.
Here.
Mr. Rogers represents the Berkeley District. Ms. Knoll.
Present.
Ms. Knoll represents the Stonehouse District. Mr. Rose.
Here.
Mr. Rose represents the Roberts District. Mr. Polster.
Here.
Mr. Polster represents the Jamestown District and is vice chair to the commission. Mr. Haldeman.
Here.
Mr. Haldeman is an at-large member. Mr. Kropf.
Here.
Mr. Kropf represents the Powhatan District. Mr. O'Connor.
Here.
Mr. O'Connor is an at-large member and is chair of the Planning Commission. I'm Paul Holt, Director of Community Development and Planning for the county. Sitting to my left this evening is Ms. Liz Parman, our Deputy County Attorney. It's my pleasure to serve as Secretary to the Commission. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Holt. First item on our agenda this evening is public comment. This is time reserved for folks who would like to address the Planning Commission for any item that's not on a public hearing this evening. So if you have something to speak, we ask that you identify yourself and your address, and I'll open the floor for comments. Seeing and hearing none, I'll close the public comment and move on to reports of the commission. Our DRC meeting was canceled for the month of January, and we'll turn it over to Mr. Haldeman for policy.
Thank you. Policy Committee met on January 12th, 2023 with a quorum present. The first item on the agenda was Ordinance 22-0001, amendments for scenic roadway protection, which is continued from August and November meetings, at the November meeting, the Policy Committee recommended buffering for wooded community character corridors identified as scenic. At this January 12th meeting and continuing this initiative, the committee considered staff's recommendations to increase setback requirements within the A1 zoning district, applying them only to those parcels adjacent to scenic roadways located outside the PSA. The recommendations are specifically to replace the 75-foot buffer along Forge Road and Old Stage Road with a 400-foot buffer, exempting lots with a depth of 500 feet or less measured from the road, and also to allow existing structures within the 400 feet setback along both roads to be expanded, providing the structure does not expand further within the setback toward the roadway. The committee reviewed several inputs from the staff and decided to seek further guidance from the Board of Supervisors. At the January 24th meeting, January 24th Board of Supervisors meeting, the board asked to include Diaskin Road in scenic roads. That was not legally feasible at the moment. The board agreed to define scenic roadways as the 6 community character corridors outside the PSA. Parcels less than 500 feet deep are exempt from the new 400 feet setback. Staff will clarify where on such a vacant parcel a building could go, 75 feet or some other number. There was a question about the treatment of parcels grandfathered in the 1 to 3 acre area. Questions on how will the 400 setback affect a family subdivision. Questions about pre-plotted lots. The board asked the committee to investigate the feasibility of an overlay district, especially for Forge Road, but maybe also for Diaskin. Wooded community character corridors were never discussed. Trade-offs for parcels with the new 400-foot setback. How would that work? The matter is unresolved pending more analysis. It'll be on a later policy meeting. The second item on the agenda were amendments for calculation of residential development density. The committee next addressed a request made by the Board of Supervisors to consider amending how residential density is calculated with a direction to explore using net acreage. If the county's sole intent is to minimize development capacity on any given parcel, it would use net acreage method in calculating density. Gross acreage produces the largest number of housing units and the largest density per acre of developable land. Then the alternative single number method, then the alternative step method with net acreage yielding the fewest and smallest density. There are, however, other considerations. Points in favor of methods other than net acreage Comp plan consistency. Low density and moderate density residential recommend density ranges based on gross acreage, while mixed use and economic opportunity use net acreage. Net acreage will reduce density in residential districts, which are mostly within the PSA. This might increase development pressure in the rural lands. Reducing densities could reduce opportunities for workforce housing, and costs such as homeowners association dues would be increased with lower density. Those are all pointing in favor of methods other than net acreage. Points in favor of methods other than gross acreage. Number one, community character, compatibility of new development with adjacent existing communities and protecting open space, and residents' consistent support for rural character. Number two, lower demands for public facilities. Number three, lower traffic congestion, reduces automobile dependency. Number four, less impervious surface, less stormwater runoff, and better aquifer recharge. And number five, fiscal issues can cut both ways. The committee reviewed ordinances from other jurisdictions and found that they all do it in different ways. The committee was divided on this issue, with two committee members favoring the net acreage. Another member was unsure of what was meant to be accomplished, and another member proposed unspecified compensation to affect landowners for the loss of development rights attributed to steep slopes and RPA. The committee again decided to seek guidance for the board on these questions and did so at the January 24 supervisors business meeting. In response, all board members agree that this is a high priority and that the board is looking for an ordinance that will transition us to a net developable density as fast as we can. No additional direction is required. The board wants to hear pros and cons. This dovetails with cumulative impact in the watershed study, and it must avoid pockets of ultra-high density. The committee will continue its deliberations on these issues at a special meeting called for February 23rd.
Thank you, Mr. Alderman. Any questions? Because he would like to talk some more.
No, he wouldn't.
So, thank you, Mr. Alderman. Our next item on the agenda is our consent agenda. The only item we have tonight are the minutes of the January 4th, 2023 regular meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Our one and only public hearing this evening, AFD-22-0019-1245 Stewarts Road, Barn Swamp, AFD Withdrawal. Mr. Wysong, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to the Commission. Mr. Tim Mills has applied to withdraw approximately 23.84 acres of his 52.15 acre parcel from the Barn Swamp Agricultural and Forestal District. This parcel is addressed 1245 Stewarts Road, is zoned A1 agricultural, and is designated for rural lands on the comprehensive plan, and is located outside the primary service area. In 2022, the county notified property owners of the impending renewal period and the need for applicants to submit the request for withdrawal in writing multiple times. Specifically, the county mailed every property owner within an AFD a letter in May and in August informing each property owner they needed to submit a written withdrawal request prior to the September board meeting. No written request was submitted to the county by the applicant prior to the board's meeting. This means that this request was received afterwards and is outside the renewal period. Withdrawal requests outside of the renewal period are considered per the criteria listed in the Board of Supervisors policy governing the withdrawal of properties from AFDs. The criteria are as follows. Number one, the request is caused by a change in circumstances that could not have been anticipated at the time the application was made for inclusion in the district. This has historically been interpreted as the death of a property owner, which thankfully is not the case in this instance. The request would serve a public purpose as opposed to the interest of the property owner that could not otherwise be realized upon expiration of the AFD. And staff interprets a public purpose typically as using the land for a public facility such as a school or a fire station. The applicant is proposing a minor residential subdivision, which is not considered a public purpose. Number three, the request would not cause damage or disruption to the existing district, and staff finds the AFD would continue to meet the minimum acreage requirements if this withdrawal is approved, so it does meet that criteria. And number four, if the request for withdrawal is in conjunction with a proposal to convert the land use of the property to a different use than is currently in place on the property, the new land use would be in conformance with the comprehensive plan. And as I mentioned before, the purpose of this application is to allow for the development of a minor subdivision for a residential development on this parcel. Residential development is discouraged within rural lands in the comprehensive plan. As such, staff finds that this application would not cause a disruption to the AFD, but does not meet the other criteria. Based on the evaluation of the criteria listed in the Board of Supervisors policy, staff recommends that the Planning Commission recommend denial of this request to the Board of Supervisors. At its January 19th annual meeting, the AFD committee recommended approval of this withdrawal request by a vote of 7-0. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have, and I believe the applicant is here tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weisong. Any questions? Mr. Polster?
Could you bring up the not the conceptual plan, the master plan that's proposed?
I do think we have the subdivision plat that was uploaded with the
Right.
packet. Should be right
Go
there.
to the
Thank you, Beth.
second one. As I recall, from almost a year ago, the DRC reviewed this case and at that time, this current Lot 5 was actually divided into two. Is it still the intent to keep it as is, or is there a future notion to subdivide that parcel, that Lot 5?
The current plat doesn't show that division, and I would have to defer to the property owner on the ultimate plan for the land.
Okay.
Mr. Crowe?
Following along with Mr. Polster's train of thought here, the conceptual plan that was approved, recommended approval for the property, my understanding is that the total acreage in the conceptual plan, part of it was property that is within the AFD, and which is why the applicant is requesting the withdrawal. But my question goes back to just conceptual plans in general. Approval of a conceptual plan, does that start a clock for an applicant that they have to take a certain action within a certain amount of time to move from a conceptual plan to a site plan or an SUP or a rezoning, whatever the case may be? Does it signal an intent to develop? Could you just give a little background on what it means to have an approved conceptual plan?
Sure. So a conceptual plan is really an option for property owners or someone who's not the property owner to evaluate whether a proposed idea or concept could work on a property and what kind of steps would need to happen in order to pursue that idea. So I don't even know if we don't issue approval letters for conceptual plans. We provide a comment letter and let people know. But to answer your question, there's no shot clock or anything like that after a conceptual letter is issued. That's then up to the property owner to pursue when they want to do that use, if they want to do it at all on their own time period. And we would certainly cooperate with them and react to any other inquiries. But once we've done the conceptual review and issued the letter, it's totally up to the property owner to determine the timeline for pursuing that, if at all.
Okay.
Polster?
As I recall, I mean, my memory's a little fuzzy on this, the intent of the applicant coming to us for the conceptual plan was in order to make an offer for the purchase of that property. But before doing that, they wanted to do the due diligence, which is why they submitted the plan, but more importantly then the discussions on entries in and out, shared driveways, and in fact, as I recall, this was actually 8 parcels, of which there were 3 parcels or 2 parcels on the Racefield side, and so that the final plan actually reduced the footprint, if I understand it correctly.
So the DRC did recommend approval of the shared driveway exception request for the subdivision, and the Planning Commission did approve that as part of the consent agenda in 2021. So that is correct. I don't have the staff report from the exception request in front of me, but this was the intention of Mr. Mills dating back to submitting that request.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Mr. Weisong?
I have one. When you send out letters notifying that the AFD period is about to expire, and nobody lives on the affected property, you have another address for the property owner, I take it, right? Nobody lives on this property, so.
Correct. So in the real estate assessor's database and information that we use to mail out letters, there is the property address and then there is a mailing address. In instances like this, they are different, and we always use the mailing address for just that reason.
Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Weissong. This time I'd like to open the public hearing, and I have one speaker card, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Connor, and gentlemen, ma'am, I appreciate the opportunity to come speak tonight, and I commend you on your memory. It's been 2 years since I were before you for this particular matter.
Mr. Mills, could I just ask for the record, could you state your address too, please?
Yes, I live at 306 the Main West in Williamsburg, Virginia, and I also own this property, which is I will be living in by the end of next year, I hope. My daughter currently lives there, so there is a house there, and we have been working diligently to upgrade and modify the property. I'll be as brief as I can, but I'll go through some history and probably some differences in nomenclature, if you will, and what's been said and what's been presented. And to the extent that I am responsible for having to be here tonight, I apologize profusely for having to be here. I feel like we shouldn't have to go through this, but I've been asked to do this, so we will do this. So I worked with planning for 5 months in late 2020 and 2021 prior to purchasing the property. I think that was referenced. And as a result of the due diligence that we went through, we were given what nomenclature I received from planning was an adopted master plan. And we used that in confidence to go ahead and purchase the property. And working with planning, we knew that about half the property is in the AFD, so we would wait until the AFD expired before we would submit our plats. So in the past 2 years, we've been just working on the property, doing improvements to the house, and there are actually 2 plats that have been submitted. They were submitted prior to the 20-acre minimum thing, which really shouldn't really apply to us because we had the approval prior to this. But in summer of last year, I contacted the planners, worked with Tom Linder at the time, and said, hey, I've hired a surveyor. We're going through the subdivision process. We're going to submit the plats as soon as the AFD expires, which is scheduled to expire on October 31st of last year. And is there anything else I need to do? And he's been very good to work with. He says, no, you're fine. If you want me to look at them, that's great. But, proceed as you need to. So we've been going through that process of surveying the property and getting the plats ready to subdivide. So we did receive I received a letter from planning it's dated August 17th from Mr. Holt, and I read the letter. I read the letter twice, and it said I needed to submit in writing the request that we come out of the AFD. So and I'm an engineer. I write construction specifications and RFP documents all day long, and I guess the confusion on my part, and I would implore planning to change their language, is that letter is not clear as to when I had to submit my request. So the board met, so I got the letter on the 17th of August. The board met on the 13th of September, and apparently, I don't go to the board meetings or really pay much attention to them, but of course, I've never put the property in the AFD. I bought the property with the AFD, so maybe not familiar with the process. But apparently at that meeting, the board extended the AFD and our property was included in that. I went to the county planning department on September 26th. It was a month, 5 weeks before the AFD, in my mind, still was set to expire. And I went to the front desk and said, hey, I want to submit a letter. Can you tell me how to do that? And the person at the front desk said, well, it's already been extended. So I submitted a letter that night. I was kind of upset. but submitted a letter, said, hey, you know, we've been working with planning for 2 years. We want to come out of the AFD. Apparently, it's been extended without our knowledge. And I didn't get any response to that letter. So I submitted a second letter on November 18th saying, we want to come out of the AFD. We need to move forward. And by this time, we had gotten comments. We had submitted a plat. We actually submitted 2 plats. Someone asked about the lots. There's 2 separate plats. One subdivides the piece on top, which is in the AFD, and the other one subdivides this piece into 2 parcels. So my wife and I are going to move into the farmhouse when it's done, and we're going to keep 20 some odd acres for ourselves, and our 5 children are each going to have anywhere from 6 to 8 acres for themselves. And that's been our family plan now for a couple of years. So anyway, didn't get a response, contacted the county, called the county, finally got a response that, oh, you have to submit it through PlanLink, through your surveyor, and then go to the AFD committee. So we did that, and again, you know, my sense was it was just a lack of clarity in the correspondence in the letter. The letter doesn't say a certain time and date. I mean, it does say that the board is meeting, but it really, you know, from my perspective, as someone who writes specifications, I guess we're more exact in our language. So anyway, we went to the AFD committee. We followed the process. My surveyor submitted our letter again after not getting a response through the permit link process. And we went to the AFD committee a few weeks ago, and they voted unanimously that we should come out of the AFD, and it was kind of a misunderstanding. So that's sort of where we're at. We're planning to continue farming. We have continued to farm. Even this lot will be subdivided. Both lots will be continued to farm. On the AFD, that's basically a timber lot. If we subdivide it, we will not timber it. We will have 4 homes on there, very modest homes in the woods. If we can't subdivide it, we'll probably end up timbering it, which I really don't want to do. So that's where we are. And I've got building permits open on the house. I'm about to demolish that little barn up there and build another one. And my daughter's meeting with mortgage companies and builders ready to start construction on her home. So that's where we are. That's kind of a history of where we are. And any questions you have, I can answer for you.
Mr. Bolster?
I just want to clarify with this plat up here. As I recall, the way this one was subdivided is where the septic field was to the left of that was the other lot that you were going to
Yes,
for your
that's
daughter.
correct.
And
Yeah.
And so I guess what if this is a proposed master plan, wouldn't it show?
This is the plat. The master plan is a different document.
And so, Thomas, if I'm not mistaken, in the other one, that lot 4, which actually kind of goes off to the left-hand side of this drawing?
Can I share this?
Yeah. If you and I can able to make. Just sort of pass this down. It shows all 6 of the lots.
The reason there's 2 plats is it's 2 minor subdivisions. So we're going to subdivide the top part and then subdivide the bottom part. So you only have 1 plat here. There's a second plat that subdivides the bottom part. And there was a question about, there was a long race field. We're going to keep the 22 acres, my wife and I, and race field, that big open field, that will continue to be farmed.
That's
For, you know, the only thing I'm going to do is in the interim, since we bought this property, the county has approved a solar farm in our back door. We're going to plant probably 50 feet of buffer in addition to the buffer that they're putting there, because that's right out the back of our house, unfortunately.
Any other question? Mr. Crump?
Just to clarify, so there's an existing 1915 farmhouse
Yes.
on the property
It's
that
100 years
you're
old, yep.
renovating, and then are you building, do you have another structure under construction, another residential structure on the acreage somewhere?
No, we can't do that. I mean,
That's
you
what
can't
I-
have 2 structures. I mean, I've
Right.
got a barn.
Right.
I call it a barn. It's a shed that's falling over, and I've got an application into the building department to replace that barn with another small barn. It's not a big
That would
barn, it's a
be
small barn.
allowable?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, I knew that another residence couldn't go up, and I wasn't sure if there would, if there had been something that happened in between that we weren't aware of. Okay.
At all.
Any other questions for Mr. Mills? Thank you, Mr. Mills. Appreciate it.
You can keep that document.
I think Mr. Rogers has it at the end there. If you don't have any more speaker cards on this evening, anybody else wish to speak on this application? Hearing and seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing and open it up for discussion. Mr. Rogers?
Since there's error, when I read the August 17 letter, and I try to put myself in the shoes of a lay person, I find myself agreeing with the applicant here to the extent that what I saw was there's going to be a hearing. It didn't say there's going to be the hearing that makes the decision effective October 31st. Now, it doesn't say there is or will not be other hearings, but at least it's quite plausible to me to read the letter as drafted and not see that as some certain deadline.
So just for clarification, so that verbiage and the specific dates of the Planning Commission board meeting were in the first letter. We don't normally send out a second letter. So if anything, from a staff perspective, that second one really was supplemental, and that was because as we got further into it, there was a need to amend those conditions to be more consistent with state code. And state code says even when you make it more consistent and clean it up, you've got to re-notify everybody. So it would have been in the more clear in the first letter.
Just in general, one of the, I think from putting myself in the position, because I have received these letters, because I do have property inside an AFD, and I do, for at least 3 renewal periods have received the letters, and if I had a pending project that I wanted to go through and I received the letter saying the Board of Supervisors is going to meet on September 13th, I think, if it was my project and I had something at stake here, if nothing else, I would have called either the board secretary or the planning director and say, wait a minute, is there something else that I need to be aware of or what have you? One of my problems with this particular case is the fact that we don't see this sort of thing that often, if at all. So apparently there's not a widespread amount of confusion over AFD withdrawal letters. But also the other thing that I am concerned about is a precedent. And I've talked about this before, that, every time we make an exception, that sets the precedent for another one. And in this case, and I may be oversimplifying it, but it seems to me it's a case of the date got away from me, or I just I didn't quite understand everything that was at stake. And if we say, yep, okay, well, we'll recommend approval of the withdrawal, my concern is that a month from now, somebody else can say, well, I really didn't understand when I got my letter that I could have, pulled some acreages out, and I have a project pending, so I'd like an out-of-cycle review and approval, just like you did for the previous applicant. And this is where my concern is. Part of me is sympathetic, saying that, yeah, there was a conceptual plan and intent was communicated, by submitting a conceptual plan. But on the other hand, and that was the reason I asked Thomas the question about what does approval of a conceptual plan mean? It doesn't mean anything other than this seems like a pretty good idea if you want to pursue it, and you don't even have to be the landowner to submit a conceptual plan. That was the thing that was astounding to me. So part of me is sympathetic to the dilemma of being caught in the midst of a bureaucracy. But also, I do worry that it didn't meet, this really doesn't meet any of the criteria, the 4 criteria the Board of Supervisors established. And for us to recommend approval, I think is setting a precedent that could be problematic down the road. So.
Crump. Holster.
I'm not so worried about a precedent as much as maybe using a little common sense to what's the right thing to do here. And, you know, we've had this discussion before, is the guidance that we have is exactly that. It's a kind of a regulatory type thing. It's not like you're going to go to jail over a violation because you committed a crime and it's on the books. And so the thing that has struck me that there is judgment involved in being able to take in consideration all the circumstances we find ourselves in. I took the time to ask Thomas to see if he could find the unpublished minutes from the AFD to see what they had to say for it. And in fact, one of the members wanted to know if the property was could be part of the family subdivision where you wouldn't even have to go through this. And of course, it needed to be for 5 years, so he wasn't eligible for that. The other one that was remarkable to me, and we've heard from Mr. Bradshaw, who's the revenue guy, who voted for it. But the other point is that there is going to be a penalty for that withdrawal that he will have to pay for this. So there is a downside for this, but I don't know that the penalty should extend to it. The chairman of the AFD, his comment was that because it went through this conceptual process, it in fact was an approval, and that the AFD renewal was kind of a final formality. And I'm sorry you missed that date. But, you know, I would have to tell you that he had gone through all the due diligence beforehand to be able to even buy the property for it. He's worked with us when we went to the DRC in terms of the farmland. He also worked with the Racefield solar farm piece when they came up here. So I think it's we're here on a judgment call more than anything else. And if we see another one that comes up and it doesn't kind of meet the same kind of a judgment piece that we've talked about, we're going to say no. But, you know, we're asked to look at these cases on a case-by-case basis and use our common sense to see what's the best for us and for the county as well as the applicant. So I intend to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holster. Any other comments? I would just simply say I'm torn like Mr. Crop is, simply because I don't think when my time on the Planning Commission, anytime we've asked for an early withdrawal, that I have voted in favor of it. I think I've voted against that pretty consistently over this time, so maybe it's time for me to go. You know, I do remain concerned because, you know, through this comp plan, you know, we talked extensively that, you know, the AFD was a tool to control growth in the areas outside the PSA. And we did have a discussion when this came up to the Planning Commission when the DRC had its removal, because I was not in favor of changing the shared driveways, because once again, you know, we were accommodating growth outside the PSA when we say that's where we don't want growth to occur. So I'm kind of struggling with this, understanding that, you know, it does seem like a penalty, but at the same time, you know, it is a growth issue for me. So, you know, I know that sounds counter to mostly what I say, but I do agree with protecting our rural lands, and the AFD has always been a tool for that. So I'm not quite sure where I fall on this for certain, but for what it's worth.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion for AFD 22-0019, 1245 Stewart Road, Barn Swamp, AFD withdrawal approval.
Thank you, Mr. Polster. So, Mr. Holt, we have a motion to approve.
Mr. Crop,
No.
Mr. Haldeman,
No.
Mr. Polster,
Aye.
Mr. Rose.
No.
Ms. Knoll,
No.
Mr. Rogers,
Aye.
and Mr. O'Connor.
No.
Motion does not carry. This will still move forward to the board with this vote, and the board will hear this at an upcoming meeting and we'll get that on their calendar for their consideration.
Thank you, everybody. Next on our agenda, there are no planning commission considerations, so we will move on to the planning director's report. So,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I don't have anything additional other than to note staff did send out an email today based on the Board of Supervisors business meeting and the discussion that Mr. Haldeman highlighted. In conjunction with the chair, we'd like to schedule a special meeting of the Policy Committee on Thursday, February 23rd at 2:30 p.m. to discuss ORD 22-0003, amendments for calculation of residential development density. Again, tonight is really just a reminder of that. You'll find those details in your email. This would be in addition to, rather than a replacement for, the already scheduled policy committee meetings to consider the CIP requests. So, sorry we had to add one more to your calendar for the month, but that'll help us stay on track and stay on schedule to meet the board's expectations and requests. And we'll have the materials ready for you at that time.
thank you. Any questions for Mr. Holt? Last item, planning commission discussions and requests. Anything for the good of the order? So, Dr. Rose?
Yeah, I have a question based on the email that we received today about the vape shops and the policy consideration. I'm wondering if that's going to extend to cannabis.
So,
All under that same roof.
all of that is at a very interesting spot within the state code as well. There's definitely a lot of nuance that will be part of staff's analysis that will be in there. I think that in big picture, what at least staff will bring forward will mimic quite a bit what the city of Williamsburg just adopted. I think they had done some heavy lifting to try to think through a lot of those options, alternatives, possibilities. Could be this, could be that. It's always hard to look into the future, especially when you're developing an exclusionary zoning ordinance. But I think they got a good start on it. We're going to use that at least as a starting point. I think it does a fairly good job at that to start with, and we'll take a hard look at it from there with wonderful assistance from our deputy county attorney and bring you our best recommendation.
Thank you.
Can't run afoul of state code, but you know.
I would offer, I think Mr. Haldeman gave us a great summary of the meeting we had with the Board of Supervisors. So a lot of feedback and unfortunately a lot more work for staff. So it's, I think that they're wrestling with this as well. I think we were implored to move as expeditiously as we can on getting this through. So Mr. Crop's going on vacation, so we can probably get policy moving quick. But you know, it was a good session. There was lots of good feedback. Mr. Haldeman captured it well. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to him or me. I do think one of the things that not just the vape shop and its uses, but I probably had more calls in the past week or so than I have in the past regarding just lights in general. And we've had some general comments and discussions here, and the conversation with Supervisor Sadler last night. She's been getting the same phone calls. So I guess because of my proximity to Toano and Lightfoot, you know, we have an ordinance that allows us to control lights outside of a building. So if you have an open sign that's flashing outside of a building, we can control that. But if that same light is inside the building, we can't control it. So I think that, you know, Ms. Sadler and I had a conversation. I'd like to just throw it out to staff and everybody else and really just sort of have an idea about what we could do to address it, because it's, you know, I think it has an impact in community care, you know, with small C's, community character, as opposed to, you know, our community character corridors. But it's particularly in Toano and Norge and carrying into Lightfoot, I think it has a deleterious effect on that corridor when you drive through there in the evening. So
We have a number of those, just confirming that we have received that complaint as well on the staff side, and we'll be following up on that from a county staff reach out and enforcement perspective to get on that. There's many, so we've.
I just had an idea, you know, because I'm all into this safety issues. I think we need to look at how the light from the one in Norge comes out onto the road at night. Is it a distraction? Then, therefore, it's a safety issue. That's what I would think. Whereas the one at Francesca's sits back. And then who owns that property that Francesca's in? They may have their own lighting parameters for what's allowed on at night there. But the one in Norge, if that's distracting, like Ms. Sadler says, every time she drives up there, she's drawn to look to the right, that's a dangerous situation. So if it could be lowered substantially, like warm lights, at Colonial Heritage, we can't have bright lights. You have to have warm lights because they don't make you look. Whereas bright lights, you're drawn to them. So it could be a safety issue as well.
And I think for that exact reason, the way the county code is currently written, you cannot have any glare from exterior lighting fixtures go outside of the property line. So that is one that we will follow up on.
I think the unfortunate thing is most of these are inside. So, you know, it's what we could do to possibly impact that, because to me, the effect is the same, whether it's inside the window or outside the window. So, you
And
know.
that's a matter of state code, right? That's not, the inside-outside issue is state code?
It's what's in the enabling legislation about what we're allowed to do.
Anyway, if, you know,
So if you don't mind for clarification, the enabling legislation at the state level says that jurisdictions can regulate exterior lit signage, but not signs that are located inside a structure, but still visible from the outside?
Don't quote me on that, but we'll go, you know, as part of the current request to see what options might be possible. But it's been just a long time since I've looked at that specific section. You know, there's, I think, things that are really clear and very enforceable that we can do within county code and as part of the development regs. You know, even if it doesn't say that verbatim, you know, the enforcement idea of at any point somebody adds a light bulb to the inside of their retail store, that there has to be a reanalysis of where that light glare goes. That's really hard to do just from a practical point of view.
Sure.
However, yes, you know, safety items are a different matter. So we'll go take another fresh look at it and try to strike that balance for sure. I'm not certain that we can, but we'll take a look.
And the initiating resolution on making vape and smoke shops SUP in certain zoning districts, when do you anticipate staff would be starting on that process of?
Yeah, so likewise, the board's direction at the last business meeting was that be made a priority as well. So sooner than later, for sure. Yep. I it helps that we have a recently adopted one in a neighboring locality to use as a model versus drafting it from scratch. So, like I say, I think that'll help, get us to a starting point faster for sure. As soon as we're able to firm up that date on when we can get that to the policy committee, obviously, policy committee packets have already gone out for these first couple of February meetings, so it probably won't be one of these, and
Sure.
special meeting will probably use up all of your time for the residential density, but it'll shortly be out.
For those not on policy, if you're interested, it's the annual CIP review. So lots of moving pieces, lots of applications out there. So if you have an interest, it is certainly out there on Novus or on the county's website to take a look at all the applications. So a lot of big projects are submitted. So it'll be an interesting couple of weeks here. So. Any other considerations or requests?
I think it's on Novus, matter of fact.
Seen that.
And so
No, it's not.
Beth would have to send out
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right, it's a Google Doc, so.
Google Doc site.
No, I believe the agenda packet should be posted tomorrow, Thursday, a week out.
Okay.
It'll be on Novus at some point before close of business tomorrow.
Okay.
Yep. No, it'll be tomorrow.
Oh, thanks.
Yep.
Anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Who's doing the report to Board of Supervisors this month?
I forgot to look that
Well,
up.
that's a good
so
question. I forgot to look that up as well.
I have a sneaking feeling it's me.
I think you might be right.
That I'll send out an email tomorrow.
Please let me know and send me the notes.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll try to, in fact, I'll send out a reminder tonight, whoever.
Okay, I just had a sneaky feeling because I think when Frank did it, I said, isn't it my turn? He says, no, I think you're next month. Okay.
you go.
Okay.
So we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
So moved.